Welcome to our examination of affirmative action. Is it constitutional? Laws reinforcing constitutional guarantees by prohibiting discriminatory treatment are the most common objectives of civil rights battles. Nevertheless, in the 1960s, the federal government also began implementing policies aimed at reinforcing equal access to employment by mandating recruitment procedures that actively sought to identify qualified minority men for government positions. This policy of affirmative action was extended to women in employment and then to educational opportunities. However, affirmative action policies have been and continue to be very controversial. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy used the term affirmative action in an executive order regarding the hiring and employment practices of projects performed by private contractors that were financed with federal funds. The order did more than prohibit race-based discrimination. It required that employers receiving federal funds take affirmative action to ensure that their hiring and employment practices were free of racial discrimination. In 1965, President Lyndon Baines Johnson extended Kennedy's affirmative action order to include the inherent characteristics of race, color, religion, and national origin. Then, in 1967, Johnson again extended affirmative action to include women. Today, affirmative action policies cover such processes as hiring, training, and promoting. Private companies, nonprofit organizations, and government agencies that receive federal government contracts worth at least $50,000 are required by law to have an affirmative action plan for their workers and job candidates. Affirmative action does not require organizations to hire unqualified candidates, nor does it require the hiring of a qualified minority candidate over a qualified non-minority candidate. That's an important distinction. Affirmative action does require that an organization make intentional efforts to diversify its workforce by providing equal opportunity to classes of people that have been historically, and in many cases are still today, subject to discrimination. It focuses attention on an employer's history of personnel decisions. If over the years an employer with an affirmative action plan does not hire qualified, underutilized workers, meaning women and minority men, it will appear to many that the employer is discriminating and is violating Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. However, critics of affirmative action argue that it discriminates against Caucasians, and they have questioned whether the way it is applied to personnel policies as well as to college admissions policies is constitutional. In the 1970s, institutions of higher education began to adopt intentional efforts to expand educational opportunities for both men and women from various minority groups. In addition, colleges and universities use affirmative action to ensure a student body that is diverse in race, color, economic status, and other characteristics. These institutions believe that having students on campus from a wide variety of backgrounds enhances all students' educational experience and best prepares them to function successfully in a nation that is increasingly diverse. Yet, like affirmative action in personnel policies, affirmative action in college admission policies has been controversial. In the important Bakke decision in 1978, the U.S. Supreme Court found unconstitutional the University of California at Davis Medical School affirmative action plan for admission to its medical school. The UC Davis plan set aside 16 of the 100 seats in its first-year medical school class for minorities, specifically African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, and Native Americans. Justice Powell noted in his opinion that schools can take race into consideration as one of several factors for admission, but cannot use it as the sole consideration, as Alan Bakke argued UC Davis had done. Ward Connerly, chairman of the American Civil Rights Institute, or ACRI, argues there can be no middle ground about the use of race. This is not an area where one can fudge or cheat just a little bit. Either we permit the use of race in American life, or we don't. I say we don't. Connerly is leading the battle against affirmative action in admissions and employment procedures. Connerly founded the ACRI in 1997, 1 year after his successful effort to have California voters repeal their state's affirmative action policies in college admissions and employment. After anti-affirmative action victories in Washington in 1998 and Michigan in 2006, the ACRI has targeted Arizona, Colorado, Missouri, Nebraska, and Oklahoma for similar efforts. Opponents have challenged affirmative action in the courts as well as through legislative processes and statewide ballot measures. In two cases involving the University of Michigan in 2003, the Supreme Court upheld the Bakke decision that universities can use race as a factor in admission decisions, but not as the overriding factor. Using the strict scrutiny test, the court said in Grutter versus Bollinger case that the school's goal of creating a diverse student body serves a compelling public interest. A diverse student body enhances cross-racial understanding, breaks down racial stereotypes, and helps students better understand persons of different races. In 2007, however, the Supreme Court found unconstitutional two school districts' policies of assigning students to elementary schools based on race to ensure a diverse student body. The majority of justices argued that those policies violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Chief Justice Roberts, writing for the majority, argued that governments should not use laws to remedy racial imbalances caused by economic inequalities, individual choices, and historical biases, de facto imbalances. He stated that such laws put in place discrimination that the court found unconstitutional in the Brown case back in 1954. The justices who dissented from the majority opinion noted that today's policies are trying to ensure inclusion of minorities, not create segregation of, that today's and hence cause harm to minorities. The dissenters view policies that take race into account to ensure inclusion and balance as necessary means to achieving the compelling public good gained by a diverse student body. Are affirmative action policies aimed at ensuring equal education and employment opportunities for women and minority men constitutional, or do they violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment? The answer to that depends on how the majority of the members of the Supreme Court interpret the 14th Amendment. Today, for an affirmative action policy for minority men to be constitutional, the government must pass the strict scrutiny test by showing that affirmative action is necessary to achieve a compelling public interest. Make sure you write that part down. In the case of affirmative action for women, the government must pass the heightened scrutiny test. Make sure you make that distinction by showing that the policy is substantially related to the government's achievement of an important public interest.